All right, 132, folks. I want to talk a little bit about Unit 3. I want to talk a little bit about this particular chapter. This time we're looking at Chapter 19. If you look at the textbook, it talks about wanting to know about the Spanish-American War, the War of 1898, and it also wants to know about its effects. It wants to know about our idea of imperialism, wants to know why Teddy Roosevelt became president so quick. Here's what you have to know. After the Civil War, we hit the beginnings of the industrial age here. On this side of the Pacific, once again, we start manufacturing. As we manufacture, we have this market economy and we sell. And so we expand. We push to go sea to shining sea. And the idea being this is we want to sell stuff. We're creating a market economy. We don't want to quit producing. We want to sell more. And so what's eventually going to happen is we're going to have to look for other places to sell things. And so we want to reach out to other areas of the world. We have to extend our footprint. We're going to do that via imperialism. It's a dirty word, yes, but we are in fact imperialist. As a country, we are. We did indeed conquer. We did absorb. We did quite a few things that aren't pretty in the national picture to create the United States and to extend our footprint. And the War of 1898, the Spanish-American War, is about extending that footprint. And it's huge. We know that it's going to be flamed, it's going to be fired, it's going to be built up towards this war with Spain, thanks to yellow journalism, thanks to those newspapers along the way. We know that what's going to happen is this, that there's going to, thanks to be Hearst, a call to go to Cuba. The call Cuba Libre is about a free Cuba. What's happening is this. Spain has decided it wants to keep some of its territories. It wants to keep territories in the Caribbean because it is profitable for it. And there are territories that want to be free. One of those is 80 miles off our coast. It's going to be Cuba. And what's happening is Spain is clamping down in authoritarian fashion. And what we want to do is we want to go trade there. And so what's going to happen is it's going to make our newspapers, these terrible, awful, rotten things that the Spanish are doing, and out of the goodness of our heart and our pocketbooks, we're going to say, hey, we should do something about this. Well, there's a group of people called Jingos or Jingoists who are going to push towards war. Our president is going to push towards not so much war. But what he is going to do is he's going to say, you know what we're going to do is we're going to send a battleship. We're going to go ahead and send the USS Maine to go observe. We're going to observe what's happening. And what's going to happen is the Maine is sitting in the harbor when, boom, it blows up. It blows up, and that's kind of the tipping point, along with one other thing, is the Delome letter. And the Delome letter is a letter that is written by and to and from the Spanish ambassador that basically says our president is a fool. Not the current one, the one, it's happening at this time, 1898, and that he doesn't know what to do, that he's scared to act, and that he won't do anything to the Spanish. What we see a push towards war. The blowing up of the Maine is that last thing, that last straw that breaks the camel's back. There's even a young subsecretary of the Navy, some guy named Theodore Roosevelt, who is going to quit his job and recruit. He's going to recruit his own unit, his own volunteer unit. And what's going to happen is he's even going to go as far as to create his own uniform for his own cavalry for this own unit, basically a bunch of cowboys called the Rough Riders. And what they're going to do is they're going to volunteer to go to Spain. We start to look at Commodore George Dewey. We start to look at quite a few other people along this line. What's going to happen is we're going to push Spain to war against us. We have a lot of people that want to reach out and get a hold of Spain. It's part of this imperialism, folks. We know that if we can grab a hold of Spain, we can create a new market. While we're in Spain, well, gosh, Puerto Rico's not far away. If this gets us a foothold in the Caribbean, that's great. But the other thing you have to realize is Spain has other footholds. It has a foothold in the Pacific. You go down, you look at the Philippines, you look at Guam, they're part of this equation along this line. The Philippines are. And so what's going to happen is we're going to be pushed towards war. Okay, we're going to be pushed towards war. And what will happen is this. You're going to have anti-imperialists that are within our government who will say, you know what? No, we don't want to get into this war. We don't want to get into this fight. And if we do, well, we're going to make sure that there are indeed some parameters. And so what you start to look at is something called the Teller Amendment. And the Teller Amendment allows us to get into the war, but we promise from the goodness of our heart that we will not absorb Cuba, okay? That we are not going to go ahead and absorb it as part of us, that it's going to be just helping to make it free so it can have its own national destiny along the way. We go into this fight, and in the words of John Hay, it's a splendid little war. It's quick, it's fast. We're going to make some friends. Emilio Aguinaldo, we're going to make a friend of ours in the Philippines, who's going to lead a group of people called the Insurrectos. And the Insurrectos are going to help us fight the Spanish because they want freedom, so they're going to fight alongside the American troops in the Philippines. Here's what happens. Spain is not positioned for a war. Spain is not really ready for a war. They have places where they have troops, and they don't have a whole lot in Cuba. They don't have a whole lot in Spain. So when we pull the trigger on the war, gosh, we've already got battleships parked in the Philippines who are going to take the Philippines and nothing flat. We're going to adopt a policy in the Philippines because there is no Teller Amendment there that says we can't go ahead and absorb them. We're going to develop a doctrine called benevolent assimilation. We're going to help them to become more American in spite of what we promise them. When it comes to Cuba, I don't know how many people have heard about the Rough Riders, riding up the mountain, and they have this great battle and this fantastic war, and they're taking it, and it doesn't happen that way. Teddy Roosevelt is there. The Rough Riders are there. They do indeed stage a relatively good battle, but they're not riding horses because it turns out their horses are on a different boat. What we know is that the U.S. is going to win the Spanish-American War. We know that because of the treaty that gets signed, that we absorb a few territories. We're going to end up not with Cuba because we're going to help Cuba to rule itself for a while, but we do end up with Puerto Rico. We do end up with a foothold in the Pacific. We end up with the Philippines, which we particularly want because part of our assimilationist, part of our imperialist ideas is if we get a foothold in the Philippines, that gives us an entry port into Asia. And that's really what we want, folks. There's a huge group of businessmen that want us to have this foothold of an entry port into Asia. We have this foothold of an entry port into the Caribbean, and so we liked that. But there's going to be some issues along the way because we're going to continue on with this idea of imperialism. We're going to go on with assimilating. We're going to go on with expanding the empire. So what I want to do is I want to cut this off here at the end of the Spanish-American War because there's some things we have to talk about with Cuba, and there's some things we have to talk about with Hawaii, and some other things that come up with President Roosevelt. So I'm going to leave it here and pick it up in part 2.